Roswell is a small, quiet town in New Mexico that would be thrust into the public consciousness in July of 1947. In the build-up to July, the state had been suffering from intense summer storms, and on the 1st of that month, one of the worst lightning storms was raging across the state. At the same time, an airfield not far from Roswell had been tracking something odd on their radar systems that, to their knowledge, shouldn't have been there. Once this news had been shared, other important facilities also began to confirm that it appeared as though something was present, and now whatever this thing was being tracked by multiple sources. Not only this, but a building inspector later reported seeing something unusual over White Sands. Descriptions given were that it was moving incredibly fast, much faster than we're familiar with, and secondly, it would disappear from their monitoring systems only to reappear again after a few moments. Control room operators were stumped, and as word got out, it was realised that it wasn't the only odd thing to have happened in the immediate time frame. About a week prior to this incident, on the 24th of June 1947, Kenneth Arnold was flying a small aircraft over Mineral in Washington. He was travelling to Yakima, but he'd heard about a missing US Marine Corps plane and wanted to see if he could spot it before properly travelling to his destination. Once he got near Mount Rainier though, he reported seeing something very unusual. He said that he saw some flashes of light and then saw a group of planes flying in formation. Only, after taking a moment to process what he was looking at, he said that they were not planes. He said that they did not have tails and were flying incredibly fast, and their movement appeared as if they were skipping over water. He watched as they sped in the direction of Mount Adams before they vanished. Upon landing, he told people about what had happened, and the word spread from there. When talking to a reporter, he described that they were shaped like a pie plate. Things were only about to get weirder. On the 7th of July, press outlets across the states shared something interesting. Vernon Bird, who was with the Fairchild Photogrammetric Engineers, was flying a P-38 for his firm around that time. Both he and his photographer were travelling at around 360 miles per hour above Los Angeles. While very high, about 100 yards behind him, he saw something described as having a clam shape that looked similar to a pale grey yo-yo. This surprised Vernon as he performed an aerial manoeuvre to get away from this thing because he was worried that it was going to cause an accident. He acted quickly and stated that he believed that this clam-shaped thing got torn up by the prop wash of his plane and he watched it fall to pieces. Now, over the next few nights, the control room of the local sheriff's office in the Roswell area was thrown into chaos as they were flooded with phone calls in a location that would usually be relatively quiet. George Wilcox, the sheriff at the time, said that while he hadn't seen anything strange himself, they were receiving numerous calls about people seeing unusual and unfamiliar shapes in the sky. I get the sense that George didn't really know what to make of what was going on, but then somehow, somewhere, this entire ordeal got even stranger when George was contacted by a local rancher, Mac Brazel. On the night in question, as said, there had been a tremendous thunderstorm, and apparently Mac, among others, thought that they'd heard something that stood out amongst the thunder. Something that didn't quite fit. They didn't know what it was, or what to make of it, but given that they were in the middle of a thunderstorm, it was mostly just brushed off. At the same time, approximately 11:30 PM, whatever it was that had initially been found on the radar was now missing. The following day, Mac was out on horseback tending to his ranch and moving sheep from one field into another. Mac and his family had made a great friendship with one of the neighbouring families, and he was accompanied by their son, Timothy Proctor. As they rode across the ranch, they discovered debris on his property. At the time, Mac said that it appeared as though something had struck right at that location, though he had no idea where the rest of it, whatever it was. He didn't think too much of it right away, as he and Timothy were busy, though he did think that the material looked odd somehow, so he collected a couple of the pieces and later took them home. That evening, he also showed them to the Proctors, Floyd and Loretta, Timothy's parents. and he told them that he could not burn nor cut the metal at all despite how thin it was. He also supposedly revealed to them that other parts of it would return to the original shape once crumpled in his hand. Not long after this meeting with the Proctors, he also showed his brother-in-law the find. This conversation led Mac to drive 75 miles, where he would walk into George's office where he asked to speak with him privately. George obliged, and Mac shared his story, which after a while was relayed to the press. Or at least parts of it. It seems to me that Mac was particularly concerned about being ridiculed. Brazel said he didn't know what it was. He described as consisting of large numbers of pieces of paper covered with a foil-like substance and pieced together with small sticks, much like a kite. Scattered with the materials over an area about 200 yards across were pieces of grey rubber. All the pieces were small. At first I thought it was a kite, but we couldn't put it together like any kite I ever saw. While riding the range on his ranch, 30 miles southwest of Corona, New Mexico, on June 14, he sighted some shiny objects. He picked up a piece of this stuff and took it to the ranch house 7 miles away. On July 4, he returned to the site with his wife and 2 of his children, Vernon, 8, and Bessie, 14. They gathered all the pieces they could find. The largest was about 3 feet across. Brazel said that he hadn't heard of these flying yo-yos or pie plate shapes at the time, but several days later his brother-in-law told him about them and wondered if it might be part of one. Mac wanted to talk to George about this privately because firstly, he didn't know what he was looking at, and secondly, he thought that he'd be the town laughingstock if he spoke about this publicly. George promised to keep this to himself, but had to relay the information to the nearby airfield. Major Jesse A. Marcel and a man in civilian clothes turned up to Mac's ranch house and they took the material from him and brought it to the airfield. In an absolutely wild turn, after spending some time with the material, the forces then seemed to have reason enough to organise a more thorough search of the ranch and the larger area in question with the objective of finding more of it. Apparently, based on the immediate news reports, it seems like they may have found more than they'd bargained for. Major Jesse Marcel, alongside what must have been a larger contingent of personnel, returned to the ranch and conducted a more large-scale search, starting from the initial area where the material had been found. It's not clear if the military had an intent that was beyond the understanding of the public, but they came right out and said that they had retrieved one of these so-called discs from the ranch. The implication being is that whatever this disc was something so foreign to us that it literally couldn't have been any more foreign than what they'd found. This information was shared by Walter Hout, the public information officer of the airfield, and his message must have been approved by Colonel William Blanchard himself. This seems to have been confirmed further as press outlets began to reach out to cover the story. Officers at the base say that the disc was flown in a super fortress to higher headquarters, undisclosed. The intelligence office reported that it gained possession of the disc through the cooperation of a Roswell rancher and George Wilson, sheriff at Roswell. The disc landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having telephone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the Roswell Sheriff's Office. Residents near the ranch on which the disc was found reported seeing a strange blue light several days ago about 3 AM. This was the case for only one day, however. Very soon after the story broke, everything was retracted heavily. General Roger Ramey told Major Marcel to bring the wreckage remains to him in Texas. Shortly thereafter, they disclosed to the public that this was the remnants of a balloon used to monitor the weather. The aluminum foil-like pieces that had been recovered, according to the newer press reports, were nothing more than this, and they insisted that word having got out about a disc of some sort was a mistake. What's interesting about this is that the article showed before, in regards to what Mac Brazel had said about finding these aluminum pieces and sticks, came after the military had changed its mind. Firstly, it seems to me that it is incredibly odd that in the first instance, the high-ranking, intelligent and trusted personnel would come right out and share that they retrieved something very unusual from that ranch. You would like to think that the people in such a position would know the difference between tinfoil and something truly extraordinary. So why the change of mind? There really can only exist three potential answers to this question, and which one of them is strictly true is something practically impossible to determine with the limited information available to us who are not in the know. You'd like to think that the least likely answer was the case put forward that people were genuinely, completely mistaken about everything. The reason for this is that by extension, that means far too many people in highly trusted and powerful positions who we depend on to some degree are completely inept and incompetent to a level that is just not reasonable or acceptable. Everybody makes mistakes, and that's okay, but this is not what this had to have been. It is to such an extent that it must be believed that someone sat there holding some tinfoil in their hand, likely with their shirt on backwards and shoes on the wrong feet, and then confidently proclaimed that the piece of tinfoil was something never seen before. The other two answers we have left surround the idea that for one reason or another, again, that is not fully understandable to us, the average people, the actual find was regarded as an incredibly sensitive issue that was interpreted as posing some kind of problem for the country. One idea that I've seen thrown around was that this was all a heat of the moment mistake and very much bad judgment by the people who decided to explain the story as a disc being found on the ranch. The reason given for this is because it is not out of the realm of possibility that whatever was actually found belonged to the military itself, and therefore was their own experimental equipment, perhaps even some kind of balloon of their own, which had malfunctioned and ended up there. It is plausible enough that they wouldn't have wanted people to know about whatever aircraft they were playing with and developing, much like and similar to the later stealth technologies. If that was not the case, then the final answer is that this had to have been something truly unique, this disc, made by a people whom we know absolutely nothing about. After being recovered, as the airfield spokesman initially suggested, and upon being examined, they had no idea what the origin was. Whatever the case may be though, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of Mac Brazel, a rancher, enjoying life, wanting to mind your own business, and just trying to get by for yourself and your family, then all of a sudden you have this entire ordeal that somehow you've gotten caught up in. If people in high, well-regarded stations then told you that this was a very consequential matter of high importance, potentially affecting the security of the country, and that you must comply with their demands in regards to not sharing the finer details as to what actually happened, the overwhelming majority of people, I personally believe, would comply with such a serious demand. Or in other words, the majority of people would not want the smoke and consequences that might stem from disregarding such an order. It seems to me that most people would simply accept that those in such high positions know what they're talking about, must have a deep understanding as to why this was not a good idea to share with the rest of the world, and therefore would stop talking about it as requested. That is, if that even happened at all, we only have two pieces of information to go on. The first was that, as had been claimed in the papers, that Mac had stored this thing on his property, and then later that he was deeply sorry for sharing any of this information in the first place and causing such a media frenzy. I must admit, I have some rather large reservations that keep me from fully believing that this was truly something from a people we don't understand, who must be far more advanced than we are. It seems highly unimpressive to me that such a sophisticated people managed to travel all the way here somehow, likely using means that we don't, at least publicly, understand yet, only to malfunction over a ranch. If we take it for granted for a moment that this was genuinely the case, then perhaps I am overestimating just how much more advanced than us they would be. Perhaps that could mean that whoever found us and came here aren't millions of years ahead of us, but rather only hundreds or more. While this is an important point overall, I feel, there is actually not much you can really do with it, as it's all very speculative. In any case, the story about the disc was very swiftly scrubbed over, and the majority of people accepted that it was a case of misidentification and it was just a balloon of some sort, whether the type to monitor weather or something a little more important than that. After all, during the time of this incident, America had been using such experimental balloons to listen in on highly important testing being conducted in other parts of the world, which was later confirmed in 1994 and 1997 to have been taking place. Again, it's not difficult to imagine that they wanted to keep that private at the time, but then dug themselves into a hole when talking about the disc. Locals weren't having any of it though. Apparently, many of them thoroughly believed that something completely out of the ordinary had taken place in the vicinity of their small town. For a long time, the issue remained dormant, and nobody could really say anything about it unless they wanted to be laughed out of the room. At least, that was the case until 1968, when Dr. Bob Wood, a very distinguished aerospace engineer, became involved in a study for McDonnell Douglas. He was given a large budget to work with to try to determine if there was anything to this. Not so much to Roswell in particular, but the entire subject of seeing these weird things in the sky. They wanted to know if something unusual truly was happening or not. Dr. Wood recruited Stanton T. Friedman, a nuclear physicist, and they worked on this for a number of years. Together, they concluded that there really was something, at least to some of these reports, of unusual things and shapes in the skies. However, they were very much aware of the ridicule that came along with this kind of inquiry, and as a result, they declined to report their findings to Congress. I'd imagine they probably felt as though this would have been the end of their career and the end of being taken seriously. Interestingly enough, Friedman did not learn about the Roswell Incident up until 1978, when he'd first met Bill Allen, a television producer. It just so happened that after striking up a conversation about the topic in general, Bill revealed that he knew Jesse Marcel personally, then told him all about Roswell and put the two of them in contact. Stanton met with Jesse, who was now more open to discussing the incident. Jesse said, "We found a piece of metal about 1.5 to 2 feet wide and about 3 feet long. It felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than tinfoil. But the thing about it that got me is, you couldn't even bend it. You couldn't dent it. Even with a sledgehammer, it would bounce off it. So I knew that I had never seen anything like that before. As of now, I don't know what it was." They took pictures, of course. They had a whole flock of microphones there. They wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that. So all I could do was keep my mouth shut. General Ramey is the one who discussed or told the newspapers what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon. We both knew differently. That again is incredibly interesting. And if absolutely the way as described, it certainly doesn't sound like it was any kind of metal publicly known about. In fact, that sounds very much like highly advanced metallurgy rather than being a part of some balloon. At that time back in 1947, Jesse was charged with bringing the found material back to the airfield. Before he did this, however, first he stopped off at home. He brought some of the pieces inside to show his wife and son, Jesse Jr. Jesse Jr. later said that they brought the material into the house and proceeded to lay it out on the kitchen floor to see if they could piece it together. That's when the pair of them noticed something odd. According to Jesse Jr., they saw what they thought was unusual writing, or symbols rather, written across some of the pieces. Colonel Thomas DuBose also stated across multiple interviews that what had been recovered was not a balloon of any description, and said that he personally had been right next to the recovered materials. Beyond this, there were also rumours of biologics being recovered from the site also. Glenn Dennis was a local mortician contracted with the airfield, and during this time they had reportedly asked him for small hermetically sealed caskets. He also said that they were looking for knowledge as to how to properly preserve such a thing, but they would not tell him any specifics. As far as I can tell though, Glenn's entire piece in this whole ordeal has a lot of problems. I'm not sure if we've just ended up playing a large game of telephone with this one, but apparently Glenn had said that a nurse at the airfield had shown him things that she wasn't supposed to, evidence of the supposed biologics, and was then subsequently dealt with and disposed of. But this doesn't appear to have happened, so who knows what was going on with Glenn and the things he had to say. There are some other issues too that I've seen highlighted. it has been said that Major Jesse Marcel liked to exaggerate quite a lot, although I didn't really come across any concrete examples of this other than a statement made by William Blanchard that stated that his only known weakness is an inclination to magnify problems he is contracted with. I can see how one might conclude that meant that he liked to over-exaggerate things. I could also see that with more of a professional meaning, in the sense that he might have been too much of a perfectionist. It also seems that he and Jesse Jr. may have been mistaken about the writing or symbols they spoke about on the pieces of recovered material, though in all fairness, this has been heavily disputed by both sides. Anyway, the main point being here is that there is a lot to be dubious about and to question. In some reports, I have seen it stated that this supposed disc was found on Mac's ranch, and without much of a choice, he'd stored it there. But this doesn't appear to be the case. Outside of the debris that he found, it's unlikely that Mac would have seen or known about anything else. To clarify, the only thing that was found on Mac's property was the unusual debris, and rather, this disc, or whatever it actually was, if it is to be believed, essentially skimmed that spot on his ranch and skipped to another location entirely where it was supposedly found. This second location is said to have been around 40 miles to the southeast of Mac's ranch. Supposedly, a firefighter responded to the scene where he saw this disc sticking out of the ground with several biologics scattered around that appeared to have been ejected from it. Again, to be clear, that is quite the claim, and I have no idea if this was as a result of people playing telephone. We're in this spot where the initial find of something odd on Mac's ranch isn't disputed at all, only the nature of what was found. It is the disc in its entirety being found that is the cause for a lot of debate. But in the defense of everyone that believes that this was the case, the military at the time, if they didn't want people to think this, shouldn't have said that it literally happened. In any case, as far as I can tell, this claim only really came to light in 1950 when Grady Barnett, a civil engineer with the US Soil Conservation Service, told his friends about it. He said it was around 25 to 30 feet across and had been cracked, or opened essentially on impact. He then went on to say that very quickly everything was hushed and swiftly swept under the rug. It's important to note though that as far as I can tell, everything Barnett supposedly had to say is just hearsay. His wife also kept a diary which contained their activities during 1947, and there was no mention of anything of the sort. Another individual by the name of Gerald Anderson came forward in 1990 and essentially said that he saw the thing drop to the ground when he was just 5 in 1947. He said it was silver, sticking out of the ground, and one of the occupants was alive and well walking nearby. Again though, this account is full of inconsistencies and reliability issues. He reportedly admitted to lying on a document in relation to his account. Though based on what I've read, it does appear that he may have passed a polygraph test about the whole ordeal, if that means anything to you. The point being, again, as said, there is a lot to be dubious about here. It is odd to me that people would just make things up like this, but it's a real thing some people do to make themselves seem more interesting to others. To be clear, I'm not directly accusing any one person of anything like that here, but it's not exactly uncommon for some people to do this. Anyway, I've always wondered about the implications of this entire topic actually being true. As in, specifically, are people from somewhere else being present here with us and being more sophisticated than we are? It seems to me that regardless of intent, though it would be much worse if they held a hostile attitude towards us, with some thought, it seems to me that it's still not great either way. The reason for this is because, regardless of their actual intent, it still means that to a large degree, we lose control, and would no longer be in control of our future. It wouldn't really be up to us what happened next, because you cannot really defy or challenge a force that far ahead. Again, to clarify, if this is all actually the case, I'd also be concerned with the way in which we've been presenting ourselves. From their potential perspective, we appear to be quite hostile ourselves, especially when you look at the events unfolding around the world. One might imagine it would be in our own best interest to be putting our best foot forward, which certainly doesn't seem to be the case to me, and I feel that would be a real cause for concern. In the novel, The Three-Body Problem by Lou Sershin, which I highly recommend reading if you haven't, he considers a framework for intelligent life that he dubs the dark forest hypothesis. This is a situation in which it is beneficial, or crucial actually, for intelligent life to remain quiet, as to give away their precise location in the universe is actually a stupid and dangerous thing to do. According to the hypothesis, if a sufficiently advanced civilization finds another, whether by purposefully looking or just coming across them accidentally, they are ultimately going to be faced with a trilemma. Essentially, the three options are: A. Introduce yourself, which brings about its own set of problems because then the other civilization will be doing everything they can to locate your actual position too. In addition, before speaking to them, you have absolutely no way of knowing how they're going to feel about you. Option B. So instead, you might choose to ignore them, but in doing so, you essentially hand over the initiative to them, who will also be faced with the same trilemma should they ever discover your presence. Or finally, C, which Lou Sershin seems to feel is the most likely outcome, to bring their existence to an end. How that might be achieved is essentially up to the sci-fi writers, and Lou essentially argues that would be the only safe course of action for them. After thinking about it though, there may be one other option that is quite circumstantial. If this supposed advanced people finds another group of people, in this case us, who are less advanced than they are, and therefore do not and cannot pose a threat, one could imagine a scenario in which instead of just burning everything to the ground, they might first choose to study the other party and to see if they are a people that they could get on with and cooperate with. Morals and ethics are a thing after all, that are important to the vast majority of us. This fourth option, actually, thinking more about it, could be a prelude to the trilemma itself. The point being, in essence, is that if this scenario is actually happening to us right now, it would be incredibly bad to appear to them to be hostile or dangerous. Again, to be absolutely clear, this is only a thought experiment and there is no definitive evidence that this is actually happening or anything like that. It's just food for thought that I'll leave you with. I hope that you found this one interesting. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. If you enjoyed this video, please do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you didn't like it, then feel free to give me a thumbs down. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day, or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys. Peace.